Let us read together from a well-known passage in the New Testament, the Gospel of John, chapter 10. John chapter 10. And we want to read from verse 7 to verse 30. John chapter 10 from verse 7. So Jesus again said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life, that I might take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father." There was again a division among the Jews because of these words. Many of them said, "He has a demon and is insane. Why listen to him?" Others said, "These are not the words of one who is oppressed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?" At that time the Feast of Dedication took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly." Jesus answered them, "I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name bear witness about me, but you do not believe, because you're not among my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. I and the Father are one." Amen. This is God's holy, precious, and infallible word. This part of God's word together. It's Psalm 121. Psalm 121. Sometimes known as the Psalm for Travellers. We've all travelled here this evening. It may be a few hundred yards or maybe even several miles. But we are all travellers. And this, of course, is one of the best known psalms in Scripture. And even those who have little knowledge of Christian things can often quote the opening verses. I look to the hills, I lift up my eyes to the hills, in the authorized version of the psalm. So let's read these few verses together of Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. Lovely little psalm. Sometimes people see this as a kind of discussion going on between two people walking up to Jerusalem to observe one of the feasts, perhaps a father and one of his children, and they're thinking of the various dangers and how we're going to get there safely. And the father tells this little one, the Lord is our keeper. He will watch over us. Others see this as set in Jerusalem itself. The worshipper has spent several days, perhaps even a week or so at Jerusalem, and enjoyed all of the things happening at Jerusalem. And perhaps, like the disciples there on the Mount of Transfiguration, could not stay here. We're really, really enjoying this. Why have we to go back home? But duty calls, work at home called. They all couldn't stay at Jerusalem. They had to head home. And as it were, they're speaking to a priest. And this priest tells them that the Lord will go with them. He will watch over them. They don't have to stay in Jerusalem to know God's blessing and to know God's care. Yes, heading home wasn't a simple thing. Most of us here this evening will head out, hop into the car, and we're away. Or if we're going a distance, it's maybe a bus, plane or something. But these worshippers, it was by foot. They had to walk. And no matter where they lived, north, south, east or west, that journey took them over hills and mountains. And of course, those hills were at once sources of blessing and sources of danger. And so there were bandits, there were wild beasts, there weren't nicely tarmac roads or paths. Rocks could have fallen. That journey was a journey of danger. And so, in the face of all these dangers, they asked the question, where does my help come from? And the answer is given. That reassuring answer. Yes, God is there. He will accompany us. He will watch over us. He will keep us. In fact, the closing verse of the psalm is like a blessing. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. It sounds like a blessing. That is why some think it's one of the priests at the temple pronouncing a blessing upon these worshippers as they leave. And as I said earlier, for many of us it was one of the first portions of God's Word that we learned in our youth Sunday school classes. But this psalm has been a blessing to many, many of God's people over the centuries. As you were told, we spent many years in France, and French heroes were greatly, greatly persecuted. The 1600s, 1700s. They had to meet in secret out in valleys, little caves, and so they often read together the words of the psalm, that God would keep them, that God would watch over them, despite all of the dangers. The same thing is true in Scotland for the Covenanters. Others have read this psalm in particular circumstances. For example, the famous missionary David Livingstone, on the morning of his leaving for Africa, his father in family worship read this psalm together before both of them set out to walk to Glasgow. Then Livingstone would take the boat for Africa. So, psalm of blessing, psalm of promise that God keeps, that God watches over. And yet sometimes I think that perhaps some people can have an almost idyllic picture of this psalm. If we know this psalm, if we read this psalm, it means that God prevents all kinds of harm, all kinds of danger, all kinds of difficulty. Perhaps some of us still play Monopoly and there's the card, get out of jail free. And they think maybe this psalm is like, get out of danger free. If we know this psalm, if we can quote this psalm, we get out of all harm and danger and difficulty. And yet, that is obviously not the case. We read the scriptures. We read the epistles of Paul. Paul, as a Jew, would have known this psalm from youth. As a Christian, would have known the psalm, and no doubt he sang this psalm often. He knew it by heart. And yet, every one of his letters, we read about the various dangers, difficulties he was encountering in his ministry. Was Paul not trusting the Lord? Of course he was. Of course he was. So this psalm is not saying to us, there will be no danger, no difficulties, no harm. Jesus himself in John 16 verse 33 says, in the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. In this world, if we are believers, we will have tribulation. We will have difficulties. The Christian is not exempt from sickness, unemployment, car accidents, all kinds of dangers. The mountains, the deserts do not disappear. But the promise of the psalm and all of the scriptures is that God is with us. Jesus is with us. And they will not allow these sufferings to separate us from God, from Jesus. And that is the essential. In fact, we might say that the best commentary of this psalm is found in the last verses of Romans chapter 8. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Nothing can separate us from Christ if we are really in Christ. So let's then look more closely at the psalm. Let us see first of all the source of blessing. I said earlier, these hills, these mountains, were at once a source of blessing and a source of danger. Let us think of the blessing first of all. You see, no matter where this pilgrim lived, north, south, east or west, as he would have been walking home, he would have been passing past some hill, some mountain, where something of spiritual significance had happened. And yes, oh yes, that's where God spoke to Abraham. That's where God spoke to David. I think here in Ireland, I'm not sure about the mountains around here, but let's say you're heading to the Glens of Antrim, the Antrim Coast Road. You have some friend coming from abroad. They've never here in Ireland before, and you're taking them up the coast road and you're going to go to the Giant's Causeway, someplace you think they must see. And you're driving along and there's Slemish. What are you going to say to him? It's so many feet high, these kind of bushes grow on it. No. You'll say, that's where Patrick was. When Patrick came to Ireland, that's where he worked. That's where he was a slave. And so Slemish, there might be many things we might say about Slemish, but the first thing we will say is Patrick, the spiritual association. And that is true with many of the mountains and hills of Scripture. The first mountain mentioned in the Bible is Mount Ararat, and that's where Noah's Ark rested. And what did Noah do there on that mountain? He builds an altar, he offers a sacrifice, and then God makes a covenant with him, which is in fact a development of the covenant of grace that God announced there in the Garden of Eden, that God would send a Saviour who would beat the serpent. And there, in that covenant, what was the sign of the covenant that God made with Noah? A rainbow. A rainbow. And when we come to the book of Revelation, the last book in the Bible, the rainbow was mentioned a couple of times. When God looks upon the world and his loved ones there, as it were, he is still surrounded by that rainbow. The sign of his covenant, the sign of his faithfulness. Staying in Genesis, think of Abraham. There are several encounters between Abraham and God, but the one which interests us is in Genesis 22, Mount Moriah. Abraham is about to offer his son Isaac. Hands up, about to slay him. The voice says, "Stop! Stop!" And Abraham sees a ram caught in a thicket, which he offers in the place of his son. And all of that there is a description of salvation. Jesus, the Lamb of God, being offered in the place of sinners like you and me. A picture of God's grace. Think of Mount Horeb. Sometimes it's called Mount Horeb, sometimes Mount Sinai. It's called Mount Horeb. That is where God called Moses out of the burning bush. A picture of God's grace toward the Israelites. He was sending Moses to call the Israelites out of their slavery to freedom. And then later, almost at the same place, Mount Sinai. That's where God gave his commandments. And some people think that we are saved, we become the people of God by keeping commandments, by doing things. But no. In Exodus 20, the first thing that God says, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." A reminder of his grace. A reminder of his grace. His commandments are given to those who are saved. You can think of Mount Carmel. There Elijah had this great victory over all of the prophets of Baal. There they all were, scores of them. There they're praying to their gods. And Elijah says, "Are they sleeping? Maybe they've gone to the toilet or something. Where are they?" Nothing happens. Then Elijah, and in a moment, fire descends upon that offering. Yes, there is only one true God. All these false gods, whether they're called Islamic gods, Hinduist gods, Buddhist gods, Shinto gods, or whatever, they don't exist. They only exist in the imagination of people. There is only one true God. Then, of course, there's Mount Zion, where Jerusalem itself is built. And when David brought the Ark of the Covenant there, that symbol of God's presence and care, it became the place of worship, an assurance that God was reigning. In Psalm 2, we read, "I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill." We were singing from Psalm 48. "Walk about Zion, consider well her ramparts, that you tell the next generation, this is your God, he will guide us forever." Friends, for the Israelites centuries ago, these hills and mountains were places of witness, places of blessing. And they also speak to us and challenge us. And yet, of course, there's another mountain or another hill. And I wonder, is this hill precious to us? That hill called Calvary, where Jesus was crucified. outside of that city, but on that hill, upon that cross. Yes, we can think of the hills, the mountains of Scripture, and they're places of blessing, places of witness, places that teach so much about God's faithfulness, God's goodness, God's grace. Friends, can you give thanks for all of these things? For God's witness, His grace, His faithfulness in the past, the source of blessing. Then let us think of the source of help. You see, there are those who interpret the opening words of this psalm as meaning that for the psalmist, the mountains represented God. The mountains were big. The mountains seemed so strong, unmovable. And for them, they think, this is God. God, big and strong, doesn't change. Some people say that in the Old Testament, believers had a rather primitive idea of God. They thought these mountains represented God. And of course, all that is completely false. And yet we have to recognize that for some people in our land and some people in the world, there are many mountains and hills that are considered as being sacred places. Last year, when there was the COVID conference, or the COP26 conference in Glasgow, it almost seemed that the world was sacred, the world was precious, but not the one who had made the world. Not the one who had made the world. God isn't simply observing earth, observing the stars and planets, watching their evolution over the centuries. No. God brought them into being as they are. He placed the stars where they are. He brought them into being by His word. Yes, and the same is true of our earth. God is the one who made the mountains, who made the hills. He is the Almighty. He's in charge of the whole universe. And nothing happens without His knowledge. It is true that a hair falls from her head, and God knows that. How much more when there was an earthquake, or when there was a flood, or when there was something else, a war happening in our world. God knows. God knows. And friends, that means that God is the source of help for every individual, every nation, if they will turn to Him. If they will turn to Him. Yes. Sometimes when people are going through trials or difficulties, people say to them, you need to draw upon your inner resources. And maybe sometimes that is helpful advice. But in many, many situations it means help can only come from you. There's no outside source. God doesn't exist. But the truly wise person relies upon the Lord, not occasionally, but constantly. I don't know whether you've noticed it in the psalm, verses 5, 7 and 8. 3 times it says, it is the Lord who keeps. 3 times. And of course, the doctrine of the Trinity isn't fully revealed until the New Testament. But there are hints here and there in the Old Testament. For example, even in Genesis chapter 1, God doesn't say, I am going to make things, let us, plural. Why is it plural? Because God is one and God is 3 at the same time. But here in these verses, perhaps, God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is interested in us and watches over us. God is in a relationship that is personal. He reveals Himself in a loving relationship, and He watches over his people, his spiritual children upon earth. And friends, we need to ask ourselves, are we conscious in a practical way, day by day, of this privilege of being able to have fellowship, having communion with God? That he keeps us, he watches over us, he cares for us. A child may be very grateful that mum and dad are there. They can always turn to mummy and daddy. But we who are grown up, do we know God as our keeper? God who is with us, alongside us, in our difficulties? Or is he someone who is far away and distant in our thinking? The source of help. Then let us think of the nature of his help. You see, as we read this psalm and follow the exchanges between these people, it is interesting to see how their conversation develops. Throughout the psalm, we find words like I, my, you, and your. And all of those words are plural, because are singular. This assistance, this care, this watchfulness that God acts upon is for us as individuals. It's personal. But once, in verse 4, he says, he who keeps Israel. He who keeps Israel. God guards the whole body of his people and also each single individual in that body. When God led Israel out of Egypt, his aim wasn't to have a handful of people who'd arrive in the promised land. No, he wanted the whole nation to arrive in the promised land. And we have the same idea there in John 10, that passage we read together. The Good Shepherd, he knows each sheep individually, and yet he watches over the whole flock at the same time. He cares for the whole group. I think that's a wonderful, that's a beautiful picture. You see, we might say, well, I like French people. I like Americans. I think Scottish people are great. But do I love every French person, every American? Oh no, there's some I can think of I certainly don't like. But God, he loves his people Israel, spiritual Israel. And he loves every single individual in that body. So, for example, there in John 10, I'm the good shepherd, I know my sheep, and my own know me. I give them eternal life, they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. No one will be able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. Love, help, care, protection for the whole flock. But the shepherd knows each individual sheep. I'm often amazed when I speak to different guys who are farmers, and they can tell, oh, that cow there, she had a calf last, but to me they're all black and white. Or I know some other farmers and they have sheep and they're all white to me, but they know every ewe individually. I'm amazed. And the picture here is the Good Shepherd knows every single person who is a true spiritual sheep in that sense, who belongs to him. He knows our needs. He knows our difficulties. He knows our problems. Yes, we should be praying and bringing those problems and difficulties to him in prayer. But there's a sense in which he knows them already because of who he is. Friends, we could spend weeks meditating on this theme of God's care, God's watchfulness, God's protection. But I think one of the passages in the New Testament where this psalm is best interpreted is the closing verses of the little book of Jude. Now to him who is able to keep you from stumbling and to present you blameless before the presence of his glory with great joy, to the only God our Saviour, through Jesus Christ our Lord, be glory, majesty, dominion and authority, before all time, now and forever. The Lord will guard your soul. He will guard your going out and your coming in. Friends, is that your source of comfort? Is that your source of hope? You see, the promises of this psalm and the promises in all of Scripture are not given to everyone without exception. They're not given to all who may attend a church. But these promises of God's care, that he will guard them and keep them for all eternity, are for those who are in a living relationship to the Lord Jesus. Those who are his children, those who belong to the authentic church, who are truly sheep. Friends, are you a sheep? A spiritual sheep? Have you heard the shepherd calling you by name? Have you heard him saying, come to me? Follow me? The nature of his help. Then lastly, let us think of the quality of the help. I said earlier that nothing in this psalm promises us that there will not be dangers or difficulties in our spiritual life. One of my favourite books is John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. Beautiful little book that we should read time and time again. And there in that allegory, Bunyan describes Christian in his spiritual journey. And he passes through all kinds of difficulties: Doubting Castle, the Slough of Despond, Bypath Meadow, Hill of Difficulty. Yes, all of those kinds of difficulties are a reality for many of God's people. And the last obstacle was a huge river where there was no bridge and the waters were very deep. It was a picture of death. Some of you here would have known John Hawthorne, who was a minister in our church, who died in November last year. In fact, his son Nathan read these closing pages of Pilgrim's Progress at the bedside of John just before he died. And so as Christian enters this river that's wide, this river that seems so deep, and yet as he enters into the river with trembling, he finds the bottom firming up under his feet and becoming solid. So he's able to cross over the river and reach the other side and enter into the heavenly city with all of the trumpets sounding. In short, Bunyan is using picturesque language to describe the difficulties that the Christian might face, but also that assurance that he will arrive in the heavenly city, that he will be saved and kept. In Psalm 37 we read from verse 23, "The steps of a man are established by the Lord when he delights in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be cast headlong, for the Lord upholds his hand." Yes, sometimes we may fall. Sometimes we may slip. We may do things that seem surprising for a Christian. We backslide a little or whatever. But if we're truly believers, the Lord's hand is upon us. He restores us. He keeps us so we do not fall away. as exceptional a man as the Apostle Paul was, his perseverance is not an evidence of his many qualities, but an evidence of God's preservation of him, of God's keeping of him, of God's watching over him. You see, all of us, we have an abundance of all kinds of problems. And sometimes when there are various misfortunes, people interpret those in different ways. For some, it's a proof that God doesn't exist. If God allows these wars in Ukraine, if God allows these earthquakes, these floods, I don't think God exists. That's how some people interpret sad events. And the same thing is true if someone has cancer, someone has unemployment, etc., etc. Where's God? But for others, when there are all kinds of misfortunes, all kinds of difficulties, those things cause people to go toward God. And in those times of difficulty, they experience a depth of fellowship, of sustaining, of care, of knowing that God is a reality to them in the midst of those misfortunes. Perhaps you've heard the story of the Christian in heaven who is talking to Jesus. And as they walk along, they're talking about the various experiences this Christian has had upon earth. And their experience is described as like two parallel sets of footsteps along a beach. And you can see the footsteps along the sandy beach. And as Christian looks upon this beach, he sees at certain times there was only one set of footsteps. And he realized, that's when I had these problems. And he says to Jesus, where were you when I had these problems? And Jesus said, I was carrying you when those problems were happening. And friends, that is a wonderful, wonderful truth. We can be so thankful for God's watchful care. We may not be always conscious that at certain times of our lives, yes, He is there, He's watching over us, but His eye is constantly upon us. He never sleeps. He's never absent. He guards, He equips, He strengthens, He helps. Being together on a Lord's Day evening for worship is great. And yet we're going to go home in a few minutes. And perhaps the phone will ring. There's a message waiting for us. A loved one has died. There's a problem somewhere. Maybe it won't be work tomorrow morning because it's a bank holiday, but Tuesday morning, let's say it is work. And we arrive and suddenly this is the reality, the difficulties, the hardships. There's this guy there, this person who has caused us problems. But yes, God is with us in the place of worship. As He was with these worshippers in Jerusalem. But He was with them as they headed home on their journey. He was with them in their place where they lived, with all of the difficulties there. Friends, if we are in Christ, the Lord will go with us. He will accompany us. He will keep us. He will watch over us. And we can leave this place of worship this evening with that same blessing which perhaps the priest pronounced upon this worshipper all those hundreds of years ago. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. Amen. May we really appreciate the value of this wonderful, wonderful promise. Indeed, all of the promises